Hi, my name is Kimberly Peterson, and I'm going to be presenting my final research portfolio today. So, the final research portfolio that I created follows a qualitative research design, and I'm going to start off by going over the introduction of this proposed study. So, the purpose of this study is to explore how students independently use close reading strategies as a tool for reading comprehension. The research questions that support this purpose, the first research question, how does close reading help with students' independent reading experiences? And then the second question, what close reading strategies best help students increase their understanding of a text? What trends can be identified connecting chosen strategies and characteristics of students using each strategy? And then last, how do students value the use of close reading? Which close reading strategies do students prefer to use while reading independently? So the questions and the purpose that I identified were based off of the research problem of reading comprehension. And I looked at this problem both at a large scale and a more local level. Largely, I looked at the MCAS data, which is our Massachusetts end of the year state tests. And last year's third graders in the state of Massachusetts, 40% of the third graders in the state were either meeting or exceeding reading expectations in reading. So what that means is 53% of the third graders were either partially meeting or not meeting expectations at all. And so my current fourth graders are represented in that statistic. And at a more local level, I used the STEP assessment reading levels of my students, and I found these same patterns as well as my observations in that reading comprehension is one of the biggest challenges for my students. It is tough for them to comprehend complex texts. So, the literature review that I found to support the problem and close reading is starting off, well, what is close reading? So close reading is an instructional tool that allows students to unpack and understand complex texts in a variety of ways. And with close reading, students are analyzing and explaining the meaning of different elements within a passage to understand what they're reading. The close reading strategies that I'm going to be teaching my students in this study follow the 7 domains of the core academic language skills construct that was developed by Uccelli and Galloway. And these 7 domains, I'm going to read them and not go into detail of them, but the 7 domains are identified as unpacking dense information, connecting ideas logically, tracking participants and themes, organizing analytical texts, understanding metalinguistic vocabulary, interpreting writers' viewpoints, and recognizing academic register. So looking at it largely, what I did or what I'm doing is I'm creating strategies that align or pair with each of these 7 domains and teaching them to the students to help them understand texts and their components in structure in different ways. And specifically, a limitation that I found that exists in the literature of close reading is not much has been explored in relation to how close reading is employed as an independent strategy for students. There's a lot of literature that exists showing how close reading has been impactful when teachers are using it as a guiding tool or teachers using it in whole group or guided instruction, but there's not a lot that shows how students can use these strategies in an independent way. And so that's my focus in this research. So moving on, the significance of this research is I want to help students with comprehending complex texts with complex structures that they might not know. This is significant because it will help me identify best practices as a teacher in my own classroom. I also have found that there's potential for continued research in close reading because, well, reading is a skill that's used in many other content areas and all grade levels. So this is something that could be relevant in other ways for other teachers. And the deficiency identified is related to a limitation I mentioned earlier, that close reading as an independently employed strategy is not something that has been explored, and so that is what I want to look into throughout this study. Okay, so the second part of this introduction is looking at the methods of my qualitative study. And the qualitative research study follows a phenomenological design. And what that means is I'm exploring the phenomenon of close reading, and I'm looking into how close reading the participants are making meaning of the close reading, and I want to explore their experiences with this intervention. The context and participants. So this study is going to take place in a fourth grade ELA classroom. There are 24 students in this class, and it is located in a public charter school in Lawrence, Massachusetts. As you can see on the map, Lawrence is an urban city in the greater Boston area. The 24 participants in my classroom are all Spanish-speaking bilingual students. And the data sources. So, since this is a qualitative study, I have identified 3 qualitative data collection sources I will be using to collect data: semi-structured interviews, surveys, and observations. So with interviews, I'll be able to speak to students to help me best answer the first and the second research question, and the third one as well, to figure out, well, what strategies are they choosing and why, to really hear from them. Surveys I'm going to be using as students are employing the strategies independently. I'm going to be using surveys to figure out which strategy they choose on different types of texts, and then find patterns and themes in that. And then observations, just watching and taking notes as they are employing these strategies on their own, either while they're independently reading, answering text-dependent questions, or during any other reading experiences in the classroom. And triangulation design is going to be used during the analysis after data collection. So, my role as a researcher, I'm considering myself both an insider and an outsider. So I'm an insider to the study because I am the researcher in my own classroom. I'm researching the students that I teach every day. So that makes me an insider. I consider myself an outsider to the participants in that I don't identify in the same way that they do. I'm an adult, they're children. I have a different nationality. I am an English speaker. All of their home language are Spanish speakers. So I think it's important to recognize our differences. A quick outline of the procedures of this study. So first, I'll be implementing the close reading instruction and teaching students how to employ these strategies based on those 7 domains, and we'll be practicing throughout the study, some guided, letting them doing it independently, and continued. So the data collection will happen in an ongoing way as students are employing these strategies. The data analysis will happen, and that I'm going to be looking for patterns and themes to help me really zoom in on what my purpose was and figure out how I can best answer my research questions. And as I mentioned earlier, triangulation will be used. The last part of my procedures is identifying the findings and limitations of the study, and those will be presented in writing as well. Okay, and the ethical concerns. So there were 2 ethical concerns that I acknowledged prior to starting the study. The first one is ensuring all participants do receive the benefit of the intervention. So since this is a qualitative study and this treatment is being provided for all students, that's something I don't need to worry about. So I have made sure that what I am teaching, the treatment that's being provided, all students are benefiting from it. And then my second ethical concern is respecting the site of the data collection. So since I am the teacher in this classroom and not a researcher on the outside, it is easier for me to make sure I am doing this, but it's also important for me to reflect on and remember that while my focus might be on close reading, there are other standards and there are other responsibilities that I have as a ELA teacher of teaching them, and I need to make sure that I am meeting these expectations and also respecting the time that I'm using to conduct this research. Okay, and then last is my reflection on all of this. And to start, I had to decide which approach I was going to use, qualitative or quantitative. So Quantitative, one of the pros with quantitative is that it does involve numbered data that can be analyzed statistically, and so the findings are more likely to be generalized and replicated. However, with my particular research purpose and knowing that I wanted to explore the experience that students are having and look at the perspective from their eyes, I knew that I needed to use a qualitative approach because it best supports my purpose and research questions. There's also more flexibility allowed in the structure of the data collection and the data analysis, and that's something that I thought was important in this potential study. And alignment. So another important piece was making sure all the components of my study are aligned. So for example, the participants I mentioned in the context section need to be reflected in the research questions. They need to align. The research questions need to align with my research purpose. All of these things together also need to align with the fact that it's a qualitative research study. So I needed to make sure my questions were open-ended. Data resources also need to align with a qualitative research approach. And I also needed to make sure that the data collection resources I was using was going to put me on the best pathway to finding what I needed to answer my questions, research questions, and support my research purpose. And the last part of my reflection is reflecting on the writing process. So a few tools that I found valuable throughout this. One was the instructor's feedback. So the way we wrote, or the way we've created this study and done the writing on this study, is each week we do a different piece and we get feedback before we move on to the next section. And I found it very valuable that I can make changes and make edits, and that always helps me in my decision making as I'm moving on to the next section I'm writing. I've also found a lot of value in the library collections that USC offers online. I actually, when I started my dissertation writing a few courses ago, I created my own files in my own personal computer in which I developed topics and subtopics of interests to keep track of the literature I'm finding. So what I found in this particular writing I've been doing for this course and this portfolio is that a lot of the literature I'm finding I'm able to apply to my other courses and the other writings I'm working on, as well as my dissertation. So it's nice that I'm able to save the work I find and integrate it in many different ways. So that is my research, qualitative research design final portfolio, and thank you so much for watching today.